Would you mind translating that into Spanish?
About 3 months ago, I published a video essay about West Side Story. It was focusing on the source material, the trajectory of the themes as they moved from the source material into the musical, the 1961 film adaptation, and the future of West Side Story, which is, of course, Steven Spielberg's adaptation. Fingers crossed that we'll still be blessed enough to watch it this year without any delays. Of course, I will understand if it does end up getting delayed, but I'm not going to pretend that I won't be sad if that does happen. Much to my shock and delight, Rachel Zegler, our new Maria, watched my video essay and gave it her seal of approval. Do I still get emotional about that at least once a week? Of course I do. I'm not a robot. There were some key points that I did not get to in my previous video essay, mostly because of time. That video already ended up being about half an hour long. I had always hoped to revisit these points eventually, and given some things that have happened over the last few weeks, now seemed like the perfect time to circle back around and talk about them. If you have not already seen my previous West Side Story video essay, I would recommend that you go back and watch it so you can get the full context. I covered a lot in it already, including the brown face. Yup, I went there. Some of the points that I previously covered will be brought up again in this video, but I promise that this is not just a reiteration of everything that I already discussed previously. I'm LadyJenevia, and today we're revisiting West Side Story. When watching West Side Story and scrubbing through the footage while editing my last video essay, there was a particular series of events that transpired in Doc's shop that really jumped out at me. The material was so densely packed that I knew it warranted further discussion. I've always held the belief that West Side Story has stayed just as relevant since it was first released, and the events of the last few weeks at the time of me writing this video have widened the scope of the audience that will be better prepared to understand this. The first thing you are introduced to in West Side Story is the feud between the Jets and the Sharks. The Jets are a white American gang, and the Sharks are a Puerto Rican American gang. The second thing you are introduced to is the local law enforcement.
Why, if it ain't Lieutenant Schrank! Top of the day, Lieutenant Schrank!
Lieutenant Schrank and Officer Krupke.
And Officer Krupke.
Top of the day, Officer Krupke!
For the longest time, I loved West Side Story for a number of reasons to do with the artistic presentation and the layered writing. It was a vibrant, colorful musical about how poisonous racism is. However, this was also a musical I first started watching when I was just a child. At that age, I did not know what brownface was, and I definitely did not know about more academic terminology like systemic racism or the prison industrial complex. West Side Story makes a point of showing many similarities between the Jets and Sharks, for better or worse. There is a lot of derogatory language and slurs that get casually thrown around by or about both groups, though as I got older I had to Google a lot of the words that were used against the Jets because they were not things I ever heard in my daily life or the media I consumed. The Jets and Sharks also both have their own songs to outline some of the struggles that they face in their lives and where these struggles stem from. The Puerto Ricans sing America, in which they address their immigration from Puerto Rico to New York City and the motivations behind doing so, including wanting to get away from hurricanes and to pursue better economic opportunities. The girls sing from the optimistic perspective of believing in the American dream, and the boys sing from the perspective of cynical realism about the poor living conditions and discrimination they face. Conversely, we have the Jets singing G Officer Krupke, which outlines the hard upbringings they've had with unstable role models and home lives in which things like domestic violence and substance abuse run rampant. As a result, the Jets are accustomed to being shuffled around to judges, psychiatrists, and social workers, with none being able to properly help them. My point in sharing all of this background information is to establish a baseline level of commonality between the gangs. Let's circle back around to the fighting between the Jets and the Sharks at the end of the opening number. The cops show up to deal with these juvenile delinquents that are fighting each other. If you are not already aware and cannot tell by looking at these actors, these characters are more or less supposed to be teenagers. This is part of why they're so prone to being immature in their bickering. It's no surprise that they're sassy when socializing within their own gangs, with rival gangs, or with any adults that they encounter.
But we're having such fun. We enjoy the playground.
See, it keeps us deprived children off of the foul city streets.
Shut up.
Boys on the outside and girls on the inside.
Hey, where are you?
So see you around now, huh?
Hey! You forgot to say goodbye.
Let's take a look at how these cops respond to teenagers being sassy.
And Officer Krupke.
Top of the day, Officer Krupke.
I'll give you the top of the head.
Because if you don't, and I catch any of you doing any more brawling in my territory,
And born like we wasn't the hot pavement.
You want to get your skull broke?
I'm going to personally beat the living crud out of each and every one of you and see that you go to the can and rot there.
That's a very aggressive and violent reaction, to say the least. Does that sound familiar at all? But wait, we're just getting started here. Throughout the film, we see these two cops harassing and intimidating different people on both the sides of the Jets and the Sharks, but there is an important distinction to make in how the cops conduct themselves.
All right. Now, which one of these Puerto Ricans blooded you? Huh?
One might make the argument that Lieutenant Schrank is honing in on Baby John because he's the one with the most visible injury out of the group, but we see later on that he's prone to going after him because he sees him as a weaker link that he can use to try to fulfill his own agenda. Additionally, when he sends the Puerto Ricans off, he makes this snide comment about them.
Boy, oh boy. As if this neighborhood wasn't crummy enough.
If you're not familiar with the intricacies of how broken and corrupt the police system is, you might not understand the significance of a lot of what Lieutenant Schrank says and does. Take, for example, the way Schrank tries to reason with the Jets after the Sharks leave.
If I don't get a little law and order around here, I get busted down to a traffic corner.
That's a very clear reference to a system where being a quote-unquote good cop, in the most ethical sense of the word, doesn't result in promotions. You cannot be ethical and successful within a corrupt system.
And your friend don't like traffic corners. So that means you're gonna start making nice with the PRs from now on.
Lieutenant Schrank is seemingly telling the Jets to stop fighting with the Puerto Ricans. He's not really, but we'll get to that in a bit. They both know what it means to struggle on the streets of New York City and to be systematically devalued. They're young kids being forced to grow up far too fast, but they all just want to enjoy their lives and find happiness with their loved ones. The Jets and Sharks have every bit of potential to get along with one another. We see on more than one occasion that they're more than capable of playing nice when they feel like doing so.
Hey, banana baby, would you like a cigarette?
No, thank you. No smoke.
All these conflicts between the Jets and the Sharks culminate in them wanting to have a rumble. They agree to get together at Doc's shop to make all the arrangements, but they're interrupted by Lieutenant Schrank. If you remember his earlier declarations about wanting the Jets and Sharks to get along, you would think this would be a welcome sight. Instead, he starts saying that now the Puerto Ricans will be using the playground, the gym, the streets, the candy store, and then...
So what if they do turn this whole town into a stinking pigsty? Hey, don't stop them!
Now, who would have guessed that the cop is racist? The real plot twist here is the way Riff and Ice jump without hesitation to keep Bernardo from doing anything that would give Schrank even more of an excuse to attack him. Besides the racism, of course. That's what makes this gang feud so tragic, even before the casualties start piling up. They are so caught up in fighting each other when the real villains are right here.
It's a free country and I ain't got the right. But I got a badge. What do you got?
I've noted the similarities between the Jets and the Sharks, but it's also important to note that the Sharks are subjected to racism, and regardless of the struggles the Jets face, they absolutely benefit from white privilege.
You started it.
Who jumped Baby John this afternoon?
Who jumped me the first day I moved here?
There has been violence inflicted by both sides, but Bernardo speaking about getting jumped the first day that he moved to New York City makes it very clear that racism is the catalyst to this violent feud between the two gangs. Lieutenant Schrank orders the Sharks to leave both times he encounters them. He offers the Jets the opportunity to get in good with law enforcement, and this becomes so much more apparent after the Sharks leave Doc's shop.
Look, fellas, I'm for you. I want this beach cleaned up and you can do it for me. I'll even lend a hand if things get rough.
The Jets don't give up any information because regardless of how ignorant they are about certain things, they are at least sensible enough to know that cops are not your friends. Just listen to the types of things Lieutenant Schrank says to them when he does not get his way.
I ought to take it down to the station and throw you in a can right now. You and the tin-horn immigrant scum you come from.
Now, I had to look this up because this term, which apparently started in the 1880s, seems to have fallen out of fashion since I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say this in my daily life. Apparently, it means someone, especially a gambler, who pretends to be important but actually has little money, influence, or skill. What you need to remember about the historical context of West Side Story is that the musical was originally released in 1957, so it was addressing a social climate that had a lot of xenophobic attitudes towards white European immigrants as well. Presumably, the Jets were born and raised in the States, but a fair few of them may have had immigrant parents. Tony, for example, is supposed to have Polish origins, and we know this because we hear an anti-Polish slur used against him. Back to Lieutenant Schrank trying to provoke a reaction out of the Jets, here's another thing he says.
How's your old man's DTs, Arab?
This was another thing I had to look up. DTs are delirium tremens, which is a fancier term for alcohol withdrawal delirium or severe alcohol withdrawal. The symptoms can include things like shaking, confusion, hallucinations, and it's more commonly seen in individuals who suffer from long-term alcoholism involving heavy drinking. Delirium tremens usually starts 2 to 5 days after the last drink, and it can be fatal. That context is important to have so you can fully grasp what it is that Lieutenant Schrank is doing here. Then the final line of this confrontation.
How's the action on your mother's side of the street, Action?
Action is the hothead of the group, so going after his mom for being a sex worker was inevitably going to get a reaction. And Lieutenant Schrank is downright gleeful at having upset a vulnerable teenage boy. Absolute scum of the earth. He is also completely unapologetic for what he does. West Side Story addressed many topical issues that are just as relevant today. It addressed racism, xenophobia, sexual assault, and the corrupt police force of America. They are typical megalomaniacs that absolutely have a racist bias in the violence they inflict, but make no mistake, they are a menace to everyone.
See, them cops, they believe everything they read in the papers about us cruddy JDs. So that's what we give them. Something to believe in.
I wanted to make sure I included that line so you can appreciate that the film calls out how biased news media are absolutely part of the problem in how they report on the various factors that contribute to social inequality and the way it enables a police state. West Side Story told us over 60 years ago all of these ugly truths about America. There is one other thing that I wanted to address about how West Side Story continues to be eerily spot on after 60 years because of how little society has learned. Character development? Personal growth? Society has never heard of those. We, ladies and gentlefolks, are living in a time where a beloved children's author, I can't quite seem to remember her name, oh, that's right, Professor Umbridge, has proudly presented herself as a TERF. So, while I have your attention, let's talk about anybody's. When I was a tiny little baby first starting off on a childhood of watching box sets of musicals, I did not fully know how brilliant it was to have a supporting character like Anybody's included in the story. Considering how underrepresented or poorly depicted the larger LGBT+ community continues to be in entertainment media today, it's incredible to look back on the character now and see how truly ahead of their time they were. As a child, when I watched this film over and over again, I just thought that Anybody's was a tomboy. I didn't have anyone around to suggest otherwise to me, and if you look at the credits and how they are listed, well, that doesn't exactly lend itself to a different interpretation of the character.
Not you, Anybody's. Beat it.
Oh, Riff, you gotta let me in the gang.
Throughout the film, Anybody's is trying to be a part of the Jets. They reject any and all comments that suggest they're better off acting in a more traditionally feminine way.
Didn't you just see me? I was smashed. I'm a killer. I wanna fight.
How else she gonna get a guy to touch her?
So marry him.
I ain't never gonna get married. Too noisy.
You ain't never gonna get married. Too ugly.
Hey, buddy boys.
I'll go wear a skirt.
Oh, I got scabby knees.
While I do think that Anybody's is a character that any woman who doesn't want to adhere to old-fashioned gender roles could identify with, there is a significant amount of subtext to their material that, as an adult with a much better understanding of the varying ways people can identify and express themselves, now when I watch West Side Story, I am much more inclined to see Anybody's as a trans character, though I can just as easily see them as being non-binary, which is why, just to keep everything open and respectful, I am using gender-neutral pronouns for this discussion.
Go walk the streets like your sister.
Listen, jailbait, I licked you twice and I can do it again! Riff, look, in a tight spot, you're gonna need every man you can get.
No.
Throughout their character journey, Anybody's is relentless in trying to be a part of this gang and prove their worth to a bunch of stupid boys that won't accept them. When Riff is the leader, the answer is always no. But after he dies and Ice becomes the leader of the Jets, Anybody's approaches the gang once more to offer up some information they got by spying on the Sharks. They found out that Chino has a gun and is looking for Tony to get revenge for Bernardo.
I'm very large with shadows, you know. I can slip in and out of them like wind. True offense.
Maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but hearing that line about going in and out of the shadows sounds a whole lot like a gang version of a closet metaphor, but I digress. Ice starts giving assignments to the various members of the gang of different locations where they will look for Tony to make sure he doesn't get found by Chino. Anybody's also asks for an assignment, to which Ice tells them to keep looking in and out of the shadows, since they might find Tony in one of them. And then...
You done good, buddy boy.
Thanks, Daddy-O.
This whole interaction hits differently as an adult. It's such a powerful moment of acceptance, and it's truly remarkable just how many points West Side Story made in just a couple of hours. It sure would have been nice if more people had learned these lessons 60 years ago, but at least we have our Lord and Savior Steven Spielberg to bring this story back to us again. Black lives matter, trans lives matter, trans women are women, trans men are men, non-binary identities are valid, and I am not here to debate any of those things. These are immovable facts. I don't have particularly large platforms online, but if YouTube is in fact my largest one, I am more than happy to come on here and at the very least say each of those things. Everyone, including myself, has a responsibility to do far more than just stating these facts. We have to educate ourselves and others, sign petitions, and if you are able to do so, financially support the organizations that are helping these different groups. While we're at it, don't tell artists to stop talking about politics. While not all art may be political, politics have always been a part of art. This will not be the last time I talk about West Side Story or musicals or the socio-political relevance of art, if it is in fact relevant to the particular story that I happen to be reviewing. That's all. Happy Pride, everyone.
We suspicion that the job was done by a cop.
2 cops.
At the very least.
Impossible.